Welcome to Tony Martignetti Nonprofit Radio, big nonprofit ideas for the other 95%. I'm live from the Next Gen Charity Conference here in New York City. And my first guest for our podcast interviews this morning, I'm very pleased, happened at the very last minute, and I'm thrilled to have Majora Carter with us. Majora, welcome.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
Majora is host of The Promised Land, a radio show on the American Public Media Network. She travels the country and finds people who are changing and enlivening their communities. Majora, welcome again. Tell the audience about your show. We're all nonprofits listening. Tell us about your show.
Sure. The Promised Land is about individual visionary leaders who are looking to create their own promised land. So whether they're from up the street from you or across the country, the point is they're figuring out ways to create better opportunities in their own community.
And how are you finding people doing that? What are some of the most interesting ways they're doing that?
Some of my favorite examples is a woman named Judy Bonds, who's a coal miner's daughter in Whitesville, West Virginia,
yes,
who is battling mountaintop removal coal mining, which is horrible to the environment, bad for the people nearby.
Is that where they just blow the top off the mountain and now it's wide open for mining?
Precisely.
Yeah.
And it's really horrible to look at. It's you get a awful cough just from being there. And Judy is a part of a group that's working to put windmills on top of intact mountains so that there's generations and generations of wind power and people employed as a result of it.
And to prevent coal companies from seeking permits to blow tops off mountains.
In a nutshell, yes.
Outstanding. Yes. And what kind of a reaction does she get in the deep heart of coal country to that activity?
She has to have surveillance cameras around her house.
She does.
Yes.
See that?
She's popular with a bunch of folks who realize that the age of coal has to go, because it is, not by any will of hers, but that's just the way the world is working right now. But, it's very entrenched, the idea that fossil fuel economy is what it is, and it's not true.
And in a community like that, it's entrenched for generations and generations. My probably they're saying my great granddad, right, was in the mines type of.
Yes, absolutely. But even though they have about at least a 50% unemployment rate, what many people live on is the legacy of what used to be as opposed to what can be.
Yes.
And Judy's such a visionary because she wrote a business plan that allowed folks to understand that there actually is a future in renewable energy. Now, unfortunately, Judy is suffering from lung cancer. And
no coincidence, I'm sure.
Not at all.
Right.
Might not live to see, windmills on top of, her home mountains.
Yeah, her dream to fruition. Have any windmills been built yet?
Not yet. But she has an amazing legacy in the form of a business plan. So I'm very happy for her.
How are you finding the visionaries that you talk to throughout the country?
I've been really blessed. I actually used to run a nonprofit called Sustainable South Bronx, and we did environmental justice solutions, up in a very environmentally challenged community in the South Bronx in New York City. And our goal was to combine poverty alleviation as well as environmental remediation to create jobs and more holistic communities. And so through that work, I got around and got to meet an enormous amount of people, and I knew that there were trends happening where there was real, true local economic development, where people understood that the value that they had in improving their own community and not in understanding that they didn't have to move out of their neighborhood to live in a better one was the most valuable thing that they could do, as a human being, because that's about creating your own promised land.
And so now your focus is on people doing this in their local communities, and you're going throughout the country.
We talk to them through my radio show, but at my other part of the big part of my work is actually I run my own consulting firm where we actually work to help people fully realize how to create the kind of sustainable dreams for their own communities.
All right, and what's the name of your firm, Majora? Give a plug.
The Majora Carter Group.
In Bronx, New York.
We are based in the Bronx, New York.
And I live in Inwood, New York, so we're right across the neighbor. That's right, the neighbors. Tell me another poignant story about someone you've spoken to.
Another amazing story is actually based out in Chicago. A woman named Brenda Palms Barber got a job where she was hired to help ex-convicts, folks just formerly released from prison, to get job training skills. And not a real easy climate or a group of people to get jobs for. And so what she did was start a really innovative program where the former inmates literally created skincare products made out of honey. So these folks learned how to care for bees, harvest the honey, merchandise the product, manufacture the product, and actually do in-store promotions at Whole Foods where it was later sold, in addition to a whole bunch of other places. And these folks, so the recidivism rate for most former convicts in this country is 65%. 2/3 of people, if you go to jail know once go back.
Yes.
And her program has a recidivism rate of less than 4%.
Oh, outstanding.
It is so outstanding. And so when I think of the Brendas and the Judys of the world, I think, yes, they're using nonprofits as a way to build and move things, but their innovation is in the power of understanding that you don't just, you just put money on a situation and expect it to heal. You put money on a situation and invest it and expect it to grow, and you give it the tools to do that.
What do you find in common across the people that you're speaking with week after week? What is it that makes them stand out?
A love of their people, and understanding that just because you happen to have been born into a particular situation doesn't mean that you can't grow. Nobody rises to low expectations, and I believe that's the kernel that's in all of these folks, that they expect people to grow, and as long as they have the right tools, and and that's in the form of money, it's in the form of resources, in the form of care and love and attention. And it's such a powerful thing when you recognize that people just expect greatness and for their communities and expect others to do that. And that's what I find so compelling about them.
And then how do you take what you learn from the Promised Land and translate that into your own work in consulting?
My work is about helping other folks build their own promised lands. It's because I experienced it in the South Bronx, very poor community of color that had been the repository of, all waste facilities and power plants and all the things that wealthier communities could afford to avoid. And we were dealing with them and dealing with the health impacts, the economic disparity impacts that kind of situations brought to us. And so for us to recognize that we can create something that was beautiful in our own community, whether it was starting one of the country's very first green collar job training and placement systems, or working to help keep the city from creating more and more horrible advocacy projects that weren't there to support us, we were able to show that there are great things that we can do to transform our communities and transform lives.
My guest is Majora Carter, and she's host of the Promised Land radio show that is part of the American Public Media Network. Majora, tell people how they can hear the Promised Land.
It's actually playing in more than 200 channels across the country for the next 4 weeks. Yes, thank you very much. It's a 5-part series that we're doing this year. And you can go to thepromisedland.org for this season as well as last season's shows.
This is Tony Martignetti at Tony Martignetti Nonprofit Radio, live at the Next Gen Charity Conference in New York City. Majora, I want to thank you very much for sitting down with us. Thanks for taking time.
Thank you for having me.
It's a real pleasure.
Thanks. Take care.